Hello and welcome, everyone. We're so excited to welcome you to this conversation between myself, Megan Sheldon, and Amy Wright Glenn of the Institute for Birth, Breath, and Death. And if you're watching this via recording, we invite you to take time and move through this conversation in a way that aligns with your three R's, as we'll explore today: the rhythm that you want to explore, the ritual you might want to weave in as you're listening and tuning in, and taking moments to rest and allow some of this information and wisdom and storytelling to really marinate and stir something in you. So we will invite those joining us live in now. Hello and welcome those joining us live. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Megan. Hi, Amy.
Hello, Patricia. Nice to see you.
Hi, Megan. Hi, Amy.
Laura, Wendy, and Noelle, so glad you're here. You can have your cameras on or off as you choose. This is being recorded, so mindful of that. And we're so happy you're here. Megan is going to start us off.
Wonderful. I'm just going to give us another minute just in case anybody is arriving, and I'm going to spotlight myself and Amy. There we go. And if you are joining live, you're welcome to have some tea nearby. And as Amy mentioned, you're going to kind of be a fly on the wall for this conversation. We'll try to have some time at the end. If any stories or questions or things of resonance have stirred for you, just to give everybody a chance to connect with some of this material in a more personal way. So I think we will dive in. Oh, here's one more person joining. Just give us a minute.
And Megan, when you share, I'm happy to be mindful of folks coming in, so you can,
Perfect.
not have to wear two hats there. Okay.
Thank you, Amy.
Sure.
Yeah, so it is such a pleasure to be here with you all. And as Amy mentioned, we are recording this just to be able to share with those who couldn't join live today, but also to share with our communities because we want to have more conversations about ritual. I think this is for both of us something that we believe is desperately needed. Mostly to humanize it and to take away the pressure and take this idea that it needs to be big and performative and perfect, that it needs to be rigid and repeated every day, and that it needs to be religious. So that's kind of where I came at this work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan Sheldon, and I am currently grounded and centered on the Coast Salish land in North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I shared with Amy, our skies are quite yellow and smoky today. So I've been taking a bit of time just to process some of the grief that I hold around our changing climate, and finding ways to bring ritual into my day-to-day life as I raise my children, as I build community, and as I share in my book, Ritual Without Religion, with the world. It's been such a wonderful process to finally, as somebody who has written books for other people, and was a book publicist and a book editor, to finally have something that I felt really needed to be shared in the world. I'm a humanist, and I kind of stumbled my way into the humanist community because for so long I identified as secular or atheist or spiritual, but not quite sure what that meant. And what all of those things did is they told me what I wasn't. They never kind of gave me a community of care, a philosophy, shared values of what I was inviting in. So finding humanism for me in Canada, at least, has been such a gift because I found other folks who share similar values. And, when looking at the environment and looking at how we treat each other, how we're going to leave a legacy behind. So I wanted to write this book to open the door into the world of ritual and ceremony for those who might not feel that they have permission or access to it. My own story came about I think I've been seeking ceremony my whole life, but really it was during a time of great loss, which is often what brings us into this work. My husband and I had recurrent miscarriages. So we had three losses at different stages while losing his father to ALS. So it was just a grief storm. I felt like every time I got picked up myself, I would get knocked back down. And I kept waiting for someone to bring ritual around me to convene ceremony in some way, and it wasn't happening. So I rolled up my sleeves and I thought, I need something. I don't yet know what I need, but I'm going to try this on for size. And I created rituals around each one of my pregnancy losses. Not only the loss itself, but what you do on a due date after a loss, what you do on a death anniversary. So these seemingly invisible moments that we don't always know how to acknowledge, I started to bring ceremony and ritual into those. And then that was about 12 or 13 years ago. And then I had people reach out wanting ritual and ceremony in their own lives. So it kind of stumbled into this role of celebrant and end of life doula, which is how Amy and I met through my end of life doula teacher, Nicole Hybrider, who is also a birth doula and a death doula and a labor and delivery nurse and a hospice nurse. And Nicole told me about Amy and introduced me to her work. And I'm just so grateful to be here with you, Amy. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you came into this work and your relationship with ritual.
So beautiful. I could just listen to you. I was just like, oh, I love just listening. I I hope that those of you listening can feel the warmth that ritual can bring. I first also want to say what a joy it is to connect in this way with you and having connected to you through your writing and through the years of knowing you. I'm just so grateful you're doing the work you're doing and lifting up Be Ceremonial is important to me. So thank you. Uh, I like how I like to name that ritual can also harm. It can exclude. It can craft hierarchies that seem impossible to change. It can be very emotionally moving, but harmful. You know, I watch films. Let's say I teach modern world history for my work outside the institute. I teach 7th and 8th grade, and we do a unit on World War II. And one could watch the videos of a Third Reich gathering and everyone doing the salute and all the sounds, all the cheering, and it's so intense, it's so powerful, it's such a ritual, a civic ritual, and it caused so much harm. So I think ritual is a power that people can harness for harm or healing. And I want to name that first of all because it's important to say it's a powerful thing. And and then my story with ritual comes from both the rituals that came from religion, you know, growing up Mormon in Utah, and being a part of a tradition with lots of ritual and family ritual, ritual that's for the church, ritual that's for the temple, which is even more exclusive community, and then also growing up in the United States, all the rituals around our nation and the holidays and celebrations around nationality. So cultural, national, religious ritual was woven into me as a kid, right? Sundays and then 4th of July and all these days. Uh, I also was very interested in crafting personal ritual when I entered my high school years because I loved to read about comparative religion, even as a kid. I'd go to the library, find these books. I really loved parts of Mormonism, but it didn't resonate as the faith I wanted to stay in. To my parents' horror, they were so upset. But I found my way to a Unitarian tradition. And there's a lot of humanists in the UU community, so I feel like, connected to what you said there. There's a lot of theists as well. And then there's folks who are two religions. It might be Jewish and UU, or pagan and UU, or Buddhist and UU, or Catholic and UU. I remember meeting a UU minister who was also Catholic, and she would go to Mass and then she'd come to the UU church. So she was in leadership as well. It's so fascinating to me to see how people weave ritual and that it's not these boxes, but they're like woven like a stream and water, and it moves through us. It moves in our minds and hearts and families and around the dinner table and in our dreams at night. So growing up in a home where religion played a major role in my family and choosing a different path and then crafting personal ritual that helped ground me as I made that shift was really a big part of my 20s. I went to India, I traveled in Jerusalem. I lived in Jerusalem for a year. Nothing, I mean, that city is full of ritual. Oh my goodness. Ritual is everywhere in Jerusalem, Jewish, Muslim, Christian. And that's just naming three. There's a lot of ritual, like the Baha'i tradition is very active in Haifa in Israel, because that's where the founder is buried. There's just so much there. So, and then I traveled in Egypt and spent some time learning about Islam. So I just have a love for ritual and a love for wisdom traditions. And I know in your book you talk about four, four ways of seeing ritual. Kind of like if you imagine a home and there's four main doorways in. Of course, there's many windows and there's lots of ways in, but the four main doorways, you could enter thinking about the brain and science and what does ritual do to the body, to the heart? Does it regulate the nervous system? A lot of psychologists will talk about the power of ritual. And we know from Bruce Feiler's book that group therapy benefits from ritual. People actually integrate trauma faster when ritual is integrated into group therapy. So it's very secular. It's very much about the body and brain and nervous system. And then another doorway, come here, Scout. Another doorway, come here. He hears the door. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. Through art and the doorway of art and ritual with music and sound and theater and visual art and food and all the ways that we dress to honor ritual, right? Even when it's just our own private pieces of our own quiet rituals that we might do all alone, there may be parts of it that we play some music or we light a candle. I mean, that's artistic. We create an environment, an atmosphere that has beauty or some kind of mystery in it. So I've said a lot, and I'm grateful you listened. But what I'd love to do, actually, Megan, is ask you about these four ways of knowing ritual, understanding ritual. And for you, of the four, are they all equal? Or is there one that one doorway you go into the most? You're like, this is my doorway. This is how I enter it mostly. I'd love to hear from you about that.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so I divided my book very intentionally into four sections. It begins with the nature of ritual. And that section is all about how I believe we are naturally ceremonial. This is not something we even need to be taught. We just need to remember. It is, since humankind existed, there has been ritual, there has been ceremony, there has been gathering for gathering's sake, right? It wasn't about, hunting and gathering. It was about coming together to mourn, coming together to celebrate, coming together to connect as a community of care. So I have a master's in cultural mythology. And so for me, it's kind of that Jungian idea of the collective unconscious, right? That we have these rituals in us. And when I had my miscarriages and I naturally created these rituals, I had never seen anyone else do them before. I hadn't been exposed to this ritual way of being. And yet I shared my story with others who had also gone through pregnancy loss. And they said, "Oh, I did something so similar." And I thought, whew, wow, how powerful that we had never met each other. And yet, to honor our losses, we were finding the same stones. We were finding the same fire. We were lighting candles and saying babies' names. Like we were doing these things because I believe it's in us. And I think when we realize that, it's not something that we have to seek externally. It's just kind of that coming home to ourselves. So I started with the nature of ritual. The second section is the science of ritual. And, I'm married to a pretty pragmatic, I'm sorry, I've got a cough. I'm married to a pretty pragmatic guy who, when we talk about ritual, and I come across it so many times, people say to me, "Oh, ritual, that's not for me." They have this idea that either it's too woo-woo or it's too touchy-feely or it's, too religious or too confined and structured. We have so much baggage and we have so many ideas of what we think ritual is that we really restrict ourselves. So for me, the science of ritual was actually saying what is happening in our bodies, in our minds, not only on our own, but in my book, I talk about collective effervescence. And it's this thing that happens when you gather with other people. Suddenly you find yourselves breathing in rhythm. Your eye contact kind of opens up your heart and you have this connection with them. And suddenly a group of strangers becomes a community of care. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. As soon as the ritual connects us, the group kind of suddenly becomes in unison. And as a celebrant and a ritual designer, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those moments that bring us together, that that cohesion. And once we understand the science, I feel like for a lot of folks, especially who might be coming from a more atheist or secular background, they're like, oh, right, there's actually something at play here. My brain kind of understands this, and now I'm going to open up my heart, which is the art of ritual. So the third section is around holding space. It's around convening people. It's around creativity. It's around failure and fumbling. I think that so much about the art of ritual for me is, you think about an artist painting a painting, you don't expect to get it right the first time. And sometimes just the painting itself becomes part of the ritual, and it's not about the outcome. It's not about the product. So I loved that section. And then the final section is the practice of ritual. So the nature, the science, the art, and the practice. And the practice of ritual for me is all about building our ritual muscles. Because for a lot of us, especially if we weren't raised the way you were, Amy, like I think back to my childhood and my connection, and I didn't really think I had any ritual at all. I think it wasn't until I look back on my life and think about, our Sunday morning pancake breakfast that my dad would make. And there would always be the same questions that my parents would ask us. And we would make the pancakes the same way. And it became such a time for our family to gather. So we created our own rituals. We just didn't quite know that's what it was. So the fourth section, the practice of ritual is how do we rebuild these muscles? If they've atrophied, if they've kind of haven't been used for a while, how do we spend 30 seconds, every morning or every other morning? I have a swim group that I convene for the last 6 years, and every Sunday morning we meet at the ocean and we share what we're grieving and we swim in the sea year round, December, March, we'll be going this weekend. And it's the idea of the practice of ritual. We come together each week and we share what we're grieving. Um, so yeah, if you ask me which section I'm most drawn to, I think the art of ritual is the part that lights me up because it's where my creativity gets to shine. I supported a young parent last week, a father who has a son already and is about to have another son. And he reached out to help him craft a ritual, grieving that he'll never have a daughter. And it was such a beautiful conversation. And I gave him ritual ideas that were so fun and creative based on what he told me, where he is in the world, what he has access to. So the art of ritual, I think, is where I shine, but the practice of ritual is where I need to be a little bit more deliberate. And really, I'm not a very structured person, so I think the practice of ritual is where I put a lot of my attention these days, just so that I can, allow those muscles to build up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much for walking us through these pieces. Oh, what you just ran a class where you invited four speakers, one for each of these sections, to communicate and speak to you about it. Do you want to share what that was like? You described these four doorways, and then you brought some experts in to stand at the door and talk a little more about it. What did you take away from that experience for you as the host and the guest who welcomed these people into your space?
Yeah. So for the nature of ritual, I invited Bruce Feiler, and I know that you recently had a course with him. His new book is called A Time to Gather, and he's a TED speaker, and he's become a friend. He was here in Vancouver a few months ago. And so we talked about, he's got such a wide range of information that he can just pull from, when it comes to religion, but also how ritual informed religion versus religion informing ritual. And, he takes us back in time, which is such a gift for a presenter. He can just access these points. And so we had a wonderful conversation exploring, where does ritual come from? Where does it evolve from? How is it shifted? What parts of it have remained true all along? And I think about some of the rituals that people will come to me now. We're creating wildfire grief rituals in our community, that may not have been something that we knew we needed 10, 15, 100 years ago. I'm connected with the gender doula, Eli, and I have a great interview with them around transgender rituals and how we can, welcome ourselves and each other in when we're becoming who we're meant to be. And so it's just such a phenomenal thing. So I love that one. I had Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who wrote Hold On to Your Kids with Gabor Mate,
Yes.
talk about the science of ritual. And you mentioned something earlier, and these are available for anyone who wants to connect with me after. But he talks about the lullaby as being one of the most powerful rituals we have because it invites us to
Mm,
process the day and grieve the end of the day before we go to sleep so that we don't carry that grief into the next day. And how important it is to have these small, again, thinking back to the practice of ritual, how important it is for our mental health, for our physical health, for the rhythm of attachment and connection to have rituals built into our relationships.
mm,
I had the phenomenal Christina Baldwin, who wrote The Circle Way and Storycatcher, come to talk about the art of ritual. And she surprised a lot of people in the best possible way because she talked about what goes wrong, like yeah, similar to what you shared, Amy, about what happens when we're in a ceremonial setting and things start to fall away, and people bring unresolved trauma and the intention shifts. And I think it's such an important conversation for us to continue having, all of us as care providers, as friends. If you host a dinner party and suddenly the dinner party starts taking a left turn, how do you bring us back? How do you continue to hold that ceremonial magic, but without excluding people or exiling them? But how do you manage that space? And I think that's the role of the celebrant is to hold that container, and allow whatever is brewing inside to have space to come up. And then I had Jessie Harold, who wrote the foreword to my book. She wrote a beautiful book called Mother Shift. And she's writing a new book right now called Sea Change, all about the practice of swimming in the ocean every day as her child was undergoing major surgery. So again, we look to the way that we process grief. So of those four kind of sections, Amy, do you have a way in, of those doors? If you think about the way that you've connected with ritual, both through your childhood and the way you're brought up, but also now, which one kind of lights you up the most?
I need to think about this. It's a great question. Ultimately, I think I the practice, because I remember being in India studying meditation, and I was doing my master's thesis, and I'm interviewing all these folks at this meditation center in Kulu Valley, folks from India, folks from Canada, folks from Israel, folks from the US, folks from Europe, all these folks, just interviewing them about their story when they started seated meditation, how they work through uh, emotions that might come up like boredom or anger, or just what is it like to have a real practice to say, I'm going to sit in silence, half an hour a day, morning and night. And I sat in silence a lot during those years. I worked on cultivating that practice so strong. And in the interviewing process, I presented my work in the community discussion one day, and one of the meditation teachers said, well, if it's only on paper, it's like painting a beautiful fire on the wall, but it won't keep you warm. Like if it's
Mm.
just the theory, I could describe all the science, I could make books of all the art, I could reflect on all the anthropology and the question of human nature, and is art or ritual woven into our DNA? Is there one culture that doesn't have it? I don't think there is. Yet that's just all theory and writing, reflection. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful fire painting, but it's not going to keep us warm. I think it's the practice that keeps us warm.
Mm.
So if I had to pick of the four, it'd be the practice, and the practice of a song that my son and I sing before we eat. We light a candle and sing. We've been doing it since he was so little. He's 14. So over 10 years, almost every meal, but not all, but almost every meal, we have a song. We light a candle and we sing it before we eat. That will go with him to the grave, right? That action, that song, he knows it.
Yeah.
There's a song I sang to him when he was in utero, a song I learned in my yoga teacher training. It's in Sanskrit. I'd sing it and sing it and sing it. And then after he was born and it'd be a little fussy, I'd sing it. Even now, if he's not feeling well or if I'm rubbing his feet, I'll sing it. It's this song that's woven, the practice of it, right? So whatever practice we have, whether it's the Hail Mary or it's saying Allahu Akbar and doing our 5 prayers, or if it's mass or like a formal ritual, these rituals that really have a lot of tradition and sort of rules and structure, still for many people that's like a doorway into something so deep. And or if it's throwing stones into water or swimming in the ocean every Sunday, no matter what the weather, I just say practice. And it makes me think, there's a book I read once called Tying Rocks to Clouds by, gosh, what was his name? Bill Elliott, maybe William Elliott. He was just this guy who decided he's going to go interview wise people all around the world, and he sold everything he owned and lived on a shoestring and traveled the world to interview people he considered wise. He gets to Dharmasala, India, and he's with all these Tibetan Buddhists, and they're meditating. And in one of the classes, one of the senior monks goes around and interviews everyone kind of sternly. How many mantras do you promise to say every day from now on? Like, and just pointing his finger, like, how many? And people were saying, oh, I'll say 700 or 2,000 or, these big numbers. And he's getting more and more nervous. He's like, I can't promise any of this. And it comes up to him and the guy's like, how many mantras will you say every day, for the rest of your life? And he just said one. I'll just do it once. I'm just going to say this mantra one time every day. He's like, in his writings, like, I could commit to that. So, the little things become big things when we commit to them.
Yeah, and I think that's in the practice of ritual, that's what I really hope to evoke and imbue to people is that, I have 2 young kids. One of them was up last night at, God, no, 3, 4 in the morning with me. We're dog sitting right now, so the dog was all over. So if I had to wake up at the same time and do my ritual practice, like it just didn't fit into my life right now. And so I think it's the idea, we talk about, what's your ritual practice, and it has to be this box. And I think for some people that works really well. And at certain points in my life, that's really helped me to have that practice that has parameters and intention and structure. And then I have other rituals that I call my call and response rituals. And I talk about this in the book, but it's like when my grief is rising, when my stress is rising, when my joy is rising, I have different rituals that can respond to that. So this past week, the musician who has meant more to me than any musician in my life, Glenn Hansard, died, and
Irish
it,
music.
yeah, Irish musician, and he has played a role in my life for 25 years. I can think about all the major chapters of my life, and his music has been there. And while I never met him, his death really impacted me, and I didn't know what to do with that grief. But I did because I've been building my ritual muscles. And so I also know that one ritual is not going to fix it, right? It's not here to solve a problem. It's to bring the emotions through me, to stir them, to move them. So, one day I went and I sat outside and I lit a candle and I noticed the bees in my garden and I just kind of looked at the beauty of life and I cried and I had a quiet moment to myself. Another time I went to the river, and it wasn't the ocean that day. I needed to be in the river. I needed a certain type of scenario around me. And I swam in the cold water, and I thought about his songs and I sang one of the songs by myself there. The other day, the Irish pub in Vancouver was hosting a memorial tribute concert to him, and I knew that I needed to grieve with others who felt what I was feeling. We need community, and I hadn't had that yet. And so going to this Irish pub and singing songs in a pub and talking with people about, our favorite songs or when we first got introduced to the Frames or when we first saw the movie once, suddenly my grief shifted because now I was being witnessed, I was being held. So the practice of ritual for me isn't always about a set time and space. It's about having these rituals that I have built up that can respond as life happens.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder for you, do you think there's some really big blurry space between what we call life and what we call ritual? Because I wonder if a life that embodies ritual is a mindful, compassionate, responsive, awake life to the best that we can live it. And we might pick up art and pick up stones and pick up music and pick up a beer at a pub along the way. But I wonder if ritual capital R isn't more like life, just living,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And my kids will tease me all the time because they say, Mom, not everything needs to be a ceremony, right? They lose their first tooth or, their last day of grade three. And I think, okay, and we have built-in rituals and ceremonies. And I kind of distinguish between them in my book a little bit. But for me, a ritual is kind of a singular action or something that we're doing, whereas a ceremony is kind of when we string rituals together. So if we think of a memorial or a funeral or a wedding or even a morning ceremony. It's when we take several rituals to kind of move us through a threshold, right, to support us. Um, so I have two thoughts around, is life always ritualistic? And Christina Baldwin and I explored this when we talked about the art of ritual, is two of the most important components of a ritual or of a larger ceremony is that it has a beginning, it has an ending because you are then intentionally crossing the threshold into ceremonial space and you're holding what needs to be held or witnessing others or stirring those emotions. And then we close and then we step back into everyday programming, right? Day-to-day life. So I think for me, that is such an important distinguishment because there's mindfulness, which I think we can live at all times and we can be attuned. But ritual is the action of doing something, right? It's writing things down with fury on paper and burning them in the fire. My best friend is about to have a mastectomy, and I'm hosting on Sunday evening a ceremony in our backyard. And I found all this discarded pottery from my friend who's a ceramicist, and we're all going to be writing our anger out on shards of pottery and then smashing it. And there will be a beginning and there will be an end, and then we'll be able to breathe and we'll be able to be connected to the ritual, but we won't be in ritual space. So for me, I think that's one of the things that often gets missed when if we think about a funeral you may have gone to, the whole 3 hours can't be ceremonial the whole time, right? It's exhausting to be in that state. So something needs to tell our bodies, whether it's a bell ringing or a candle being lit or, chimes, something will tell our body, okay, now we're stepping into sacred space. And something's going to happen in sacred space that we can't yet describe. And if we go into a sacred space knowing exactly what's going to happen, we're probably missing out on all the magic and gifts that can happen when we let go of, and we step into the unknown. And just as importantly, there will be something that tells our bodies, maybe we blow the candle out or we play a song and suddenly we relax because we are now out of that sacred space. And it doesn't mean we can't step back in over and over again, but I do think that having that in my book and in the app that my husband and I built, we talk about it as being this kind of acknowledgement of what was, what is, and what will be. And then, we're back into regular life and we can, yeah. So that's my take, but I'd love to hear yours about, stepping in and out of ritual space or being in ritual space always.
I've been thinking about it differently since reading Feiler's book because I studied comparative religion. My master's is in religion and education, and you study Eliade and all these like philosophers of religion who had a really clear understanding of preliminal, liminal, postliminal. This is what makes sacred time. This is what makes profane time or regular time. So this whole formula, and then that archetype, that formula of ritual can be applied to, let's say, the Hajj or the ritual of Ramadan or the ritual I grew up with in Mormonism of the sacrament. All these different rituals do have preliminal, liminal, postliminal, and like you said, containing an experience and beginning, middle, and end. And then a lot of scholars would say whatever's happening in that middle is connecting you to something bigger than yourself. And that's what makes it different than a habit, or makes civic ritual different than, because civic ritual, well, it still is bigger than yourself, like the story of a nation or the story of the sacrifice of soldiers from other wars. You can still have like something bigger than yourself. But then when I read Filer and he describes like the weaving and mourning circle he joined at the Brooklyn cemetery, and how his whole idea of ritual just like turned upside down there. He's like, huh, is this really ritual? But maybe it is. It's not. Everyone's doing their own things. Sometimes they're talking about grief. Sometimes they're just talking about knitting. And yeah, there's a beginning. They show up, they walk in, and there's an ending. They get in their car and drive away. But who's to say that in the car there's not someone who's chanting songs or singing, or I don't know. I wonder. I just it made me wonder that this definition I've had for so many years as a scholar might be limiting the power of ritual if I am willing to turn it upside down a little. And it's just
Mm.
a thought exercise. I would like to live as wisely and mindfully and bravely as I can in my humble human story. And yes, that involves ritual in my life for sure. And it involves, I think, courageous willingness to do shadow work, and the willingness to screw up and own it, and the willingness to, try new things that are out of my comfort zone. Um, whether that's ritual or just living well, I don't know. But I wonder, you talk about entering sacred time through a beginning and leaving at the end. What if that's birth and death? What if the whole human story could be contained like that? We enter this human life, right?
Ooh, wow.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, I know that Amy and I, have talked a little bit before about the power of breath in birth and the power of breath in death. And my end of life doula teacher, coming from a birth background and a death background, we talked about the role of breath. And I think that's incredibly powerful to think about the journey of life as being one big ceremony. And, breath is the welcome in and breath is the closing goodbye. And wow, I'm in our like the name of the company, the app, the platform that Johan, my husband, and I built, we called it Be Ceremonial. And really, I think that's what it's about. It's like I can be ceremonial in my life, but I might not be in ritual all the time. But I
Right.
have ritual responses ready to go. And so
Yeah.
I have rituals before I support a family or a person who's dying. Like before I go to see them physically or virtually, I have a ritual that I do for myself to make sure that I've let go of any of my grief or emotions so that I don't complicate the relationship, or that I'm protecting myself in a way as well. And just as importantly, after I leave a funeral that I've convened or a time with somebody who is nearing death, I have a ritual that I will go to and do to release what's not mine to carry so that I don't, as an empath, carry these things with me. And that's part of my Sunday morning ritual practice, is acknowledging grief on a more regular basis so it doesn't compound and then explode, right? I think it's really taught me like what happens when we grieve more regularly versus when something bad happens.
Right. Right. Because so much of life is grief.
Yeah, so much of every day is, and like Gordon Neufeld talked about the lullaby and about grieving children grieve the end of a day. It's like today's Wednesday. I will never get this Wednesday back again. Suddenly you're looking at Wednesday in a much different way. Yes, it brought joy, but also there's sadness. And I think every single threshold, every single moment has the duality, right? It has the both and I remember when we were getting married, Johan's dad had been given his terminal diagnosis, and we wanted to bring a grief ritual into our wedding. And so many people pushed us and said, no, no, it's supposed to be a happy day. And I thought, well, the grief is there already. What happens if we just give it some room to breathe so that we're not just pushing it down and aside? And I think that's where the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing and so many people are just trying to create more space for multiple emotions to exist.
Mhm. I love that. I have a book here.
Yeah.
This one. one of my favorite books on grief, Bearing the Unbearable.
Oh, I love it. Yes, I studied with Joanne with you. That was an amazing book, and I loved that course that we took through the Institute. It just really transformed my understanding of grief and ways to practice our grief in more intentional ways.
So, do you remember that? You might remember because you described the wedding space for holding grief in a time quote of only joy, right? In this story, in this book, she has the story of a young man who comes to her just heartsick and devastated because his newborn child and wife were killed in a collision.
Mm.
And so he just is just torn upside down and backwards. Everything. He spends 2 years working with Cacciatore, and she describes grief like a contraction expansion. Some days it's a little more expansive, you can be with it. Other days it's just this contraction of horror. Over the 2 years, he finds that is being courted, and he falls in love with a new woman that he really cares for. And she knows his story. So in their wedding, everyone pauses at some point and they have a framed picture of his first wife with their baby on the wedding table. And they all just breathe to remember her and the baby, right? It's just incredible to imagine what that day must have felt like for him.
Yeah, and I think as a ritual designer, when I invite people to consider ways of holding other emotions within the ceremonial space and give them some creative, simple ways that they could do so, it's almost like they're relieved. They said, "Oh, thank you." I was supporting a young widow. His wife had died by suicide in water. And it had been a year and a half, and he was finally ready to have a celebration of life. And he kept saying, we want it to be happy. We want it to be joyful. We're celebrating her life. And I said, yes. And a lot of people coming may not have grieved the way that you have because they might not have known everything or they might not have had the chance to say goodbye. There's all these other elements that people
Right.
might be missing. So what if we created a reflection corner kind of tucked off to the side? And not everybody had to go there, but they were invited in if they wanted. And what if we brought water into that space? And so we had a huge bowl, a blue bowl, her favorite color, full of water, and I found dissolving paper, and we invited everybody, if they wanted, to go in there and write her a little note of what you wished you had told her or what you hope she knew, and to simply write it down and place it in the water and watch the dissolving paper disintegrate. And there was candles there if they chose to just light a candle. There was flowers they could take. Like there was multiple entry points. I always try to have rituals that aren't just prescribed of like, here is exactly what you do. It's here is an invitation into ritual space. Follow your own lead, follow your own heart. And of the 150 people at the celebration of life, I would say about 75 went into the reflection corner, some on their own, some with others. And I kind of quietly watched from afar because I took a bit of a risk, right? This is the other thing that ritual design often asks us is, you know, it was a risk to even bring this up with him. Like, do you want to bring water into this space to help acknowledge the grief that people might be feeling? And she loved water so much. And so he wanted to reclaim his relationship with water because it had become so harmful and hurtful in some ways. But to watch people have permission, in a sense, to go somewhere, to have their tears, to have their hugs, to have their reflection time, I think it really gave them a different experience. Had they just come in and celebrated and talked, it's almost like only half of them would have been acknowledged, like a whole other dark side or a shadow side didn't have space to breathe. And so I think that's the role of the ceremonial setting for me is to allow multiple experiences within the same space to emerge based on when we need them and if we feel safe enough, if we feel like we're at the point where we can do that. So yeah.
I agree.
Hmm.
I agree. It's so powerful that tears is such a story. Thank you for the work you do in this world.
Yeah, thank you as well. And I think I'd love to open it up to questions in a moment. But my final kind of thought, I just wanted to thank you, but also to reflect on something that I've been sitting with. I'm 45 years old, and when I was 29 years old, I took my mom to go and see Stephen Jenkinson. He was in Vancouver, and I'd heard I worked in a co-working space, and one of my co-working friends had been part of the Orphan Wisdom School and told me about him. So I told my mom to come with me, and we went into this little cafe off of Commercial Drive, and come in there, and there's maybe about 100 people. I'd say 80% of them under the age of 30. And then Stephen comes in and has his evening, talks about his new book, and asks questions, and people come and share. And we leave, and my mom said to me, "Isn't it amazing that so many young people are wanting to talk about death?" And this was, 15 years ago. And I took a course with you around rituals for menopause far before I was in a menopausal kind of mindset. And I remember being the youngest one by at least 10 years in that group. But how powerful it was for me to be in a ceremonial setting with women that were just ahead of me, sharing, like listening into their experiences and also starting to build my ritual muscles for when I come into my menopausal time. And so I think there's so much power in not thinking about, these thresholds that we cross just through our own experience, but how can we start to build these muscles for, if you have young people in your life, how can you start to connect with rites of passage around coming of age, so that when they get there, you've already kind of given it some thought or had a conversation with them. Thinking about my friend going through breast cancer right now, I'm I'm just inviting people to realize that they can connect with this, even if it's not happening to them personally, that we have that capacity. And I think that's what we need to just build our ritual muscles more with is identifying with each other's experiences and finding that commonality and not seeing it as another of like, oh, like I'm like this father who reached out, a few weeks ago. I had never thought about a father grieving not having a daughter. I kind of had in my mind, I could see a father grieving not having a son because that's the narrative we've been told, right? The king needs a son, he needs an heir. And so for him to come to me, and he did it kind of quietly because he wasn't sure how the men in his life would respond because it's just not a typical,
Yeah.
but how powerful. And now to share that story and for other men to say, oh, wow, I've actually been holding the same grief at never having a child or never having a daughter. And I can actually bring some breath to that. I can bring some space to it.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for all those reflections. We do grow when we see each other move through our own thresholds, through thresholds that may be analogous or parallel or maybe four steps ahead. And that's why intergenerational community is so key. It's just
Yeah.
so key that people can not live in these age siloed experiences where only young people are with young people and middle-aged people with middle-aged people and elderly with elderly or little ones with little ones. And we do that a lot in the day. I teach at a school where it's pre-K through 12, but most of the day you're with your own age cohort. But we try to mix it up and we do our best to build a community. I really appreciate your reflections here. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hosting two retreats in 2027 in person. And the
Okay.
first one is normally a January like vision boarding, like we're setting our intentions for the whole year. And I don't know if you've read Wintering by Elizabeth May, but it's just such a beautiful book. And so instead, and I loved you talking about the three R's earlier, rhythm and ritual and rest. And so the January retreat is now totally transformed and it's about radical rest. What happens when we come away together and we deepen into the winter archetype, right? January is not really a time when we're meant to be producing, right? It's meant to be a time where we're going into the cold, into the dark, finding solace there. And then the other retreat I'm doing in May is called The Art of Aging. And I'm bringing together women of all ages, between 20s to 80s, because what happens when we gather and we create ritual space for these conversations to transpire? And I think what a gift it would have been for me growing up to have had more older women in my life. And older men and non-binary, like they were just exposed to so much these days. And I'm just grateful for the work that you are doing and everyone for joining live. I'm going to unspotlight and just see if there's any thoughts or questions. I know we have a couple the in the chat. Laura said, like the name of your institute, birth, breath, and death. The beginning is birth, the time of communitas with self and others is breath, and death is the closure of this lifetime. I love that, Laura. And then Diane said, what a privilege to see you both in conversation together. Deep gratitude. Thank you, Diane. Are there any reflections or questions? You've got the two of us in a room. Does anyone want to know anything more? Or have, your own reflections of ritual? Because we are all holding wisdom here. I believe that we all have our own experiences to inspire one another. Are there any thoughts or questions?
I could offer something. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful to hear both of you speaking to such, I feel, something so needed on this planet right now. Ritual and even deeper rites of passage, just this idea that there's such a rites of passage happening at birth as well as death, and they're interchangeable in so many ways. I feel like for me, what this brings up for me right now, I could speak to that because it's just such a powerful topic. What it's bringing up for me now is like, many of you know, what brought me here was the passing of my father, and being his, main caretaker. And, I come from a culture of a lot of ritual. I would consider myself, I would say in some ways, I feel like it's quite cult-like. Um, and it's been so intriguing and fascinating. I'm trying to find positive words to help reframe some of what I've been going through. Is it's so misogynistic. I can't put it in any other way. As much as I study it and I flex it and I shape it and I mold it in all the beautiful ways of the man comes from the woman and the portal and the cervix and the portal of creation, and going through all of the traditional rites for my father's passing was really difficult for me. To be consistently overlooked as the main caretaker because I'm the youngest daughter, to constantly, I feel constantly, that's a narrative, of course, but for me it landed as a persistent focus on my brother as the eldest male of the lineage, and then to go through the rites with the pundit. And I completely understand the tantric and the essence, the authentic power of ritual in men's hands through my lineage lens. I'm totally getting that now. This all helped me get that. And still, I'm processing it. As beautiful as it is that, like, we are the walking ritual and feeling all of that, there is this awkward performance that happened that I'm still trying to integrate and let it be, because it just is, and not be attached to it. And yet I'm going through it. I'm just, yeah, I'm gonna stop now.
Thanks for
But
sharing.
anyways, thank you all for holding it for me.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It reminds me of, in my book, I talk a lot about retroactive rituals and do-over ceremonies and multiple ceremonies. And I think somewhere along the line, we have been told, or we believe that we get one chance at it, and we have to make this meaningful. We get one funeral or one wedding or one birth or one chance to kind of move through this rite of passage. And I've been trying to flip that on its head a little bit because, I realized 7 years after my daughter's birth that I was still holding a lot of birth trauma. And I created a birth closing ceremony, which is typically done within the first 6 weeks after a birth. I created it 7 years later with my daughter in unison. And it was so incredibly powerful for me to let go of, at least bit by bit, some of the narratives that I had placed upon her birth after having had recurrent miscarriages. And then finally with her, the harm it held in my body. And to have her be a part of that shaped her in a different way. And I created an abortion ceremony for a woman 30 years after her abortion, and she said it finally kind of unlocked something in her that she didn't realize she'd been holding on to. So I think if we, looking at your dad's passing, is there an opportunity at some point to create a ceremony for you about what you would have wanted to have happen, or what you need to have happen now, or multiple ceremonies over time? Help people with death anniversary ceremonies, and every year they'll kind of come back to rituals. And every year they'll tell you to me, I didn't even realize this, it's been 12 years since my mom passed. I didn't realize I was still holding on to anger. And yet it showed up 12 years later. And so this is, I think, what Amy and I were talking about the practice of ritual is it doesn't mean that it's every morning at the same time, but maybe there's a rhythm to your practice where you're able to tune in to what you might be holding in and around the loss of him, but also the patriarchy that's at play there, because I think that's embedded. Amy, I don't know if you want to add to that at all.
Kirti, thank you. And what it made me think of is a book I read in college called Throughout Your Generations Forever by Nancy J. And she's an anthropologist who studied blood rituals around the world. And her theory is that men in power in different cultures wanted to create a ritual, I don't know, consciously or unconsciously, but that it's a pattern you see around the world where blood rituals done by men and only men then that creates a paternal line that replaces the maternal line. Because, like, through birth, there's blood, and that child came from that mother. There's no question. You see it. But it's a little bit of a question, who's the dad? So men wanted to create rituals that would use a symbol as powerful as that, which was blood, either animal sacrifice, human sacrifice, but almost only done by men around the world. Very few women, except in some voodoo cultures in like Haiti, did you have women do the killing or women do the ritual with blood. It was almost only men. Like, think about the Jewish tradition and the high priest. It's only a man, and they kill the animals on the Temple Mount, and suddenly blood becomes a way to link men to men and link men to power. It's this very strong feminist critique of blood ritual and how it superseded and tried to like invert the power of the maternal line. So that's what I thought of when you described the misogyny, because it's not just Hinduism, it's around the world, right? So
Yeah.
that's a
And
thought.
I love that, Amy, so much. And I think that there's, when my partner and I decided to get married, the feminist in me was like, well, I know what rituals I don't want, right? Like marriage rituals are very patriarchal. And I just said kind of in passing to my dad, I'm like, well, I'm not going to have you walk me down the aisle. I'm not like cattle being traded. And the look on his face, I have two older brothers, so I'm his only daughter. The look on his face was so unexpected. He was like, "What do you mean I'm not going to walk you down the aisle?" I'm like, "Well, there's not really going to be an aisle. Like we're getting married in a circle on a beach in the middle of a storm. Like it's not your typical wedding." But his unease and he needed something out of that. And so rather than just give in and give him, letting me walk, you down the aisle, we came together and we talked about what is it that he is looking for? And ultimately it became, I think about, having a moment with me. And also I think being given a little bit of a spotlight, like, I think having that feeling. And so I said, okay, well, what about this? And we brainstormed together and we came up with a ritual that fit both of our intentions of that day. And I think that's where we can get creative, and we don't always have to take the ritual that's been prescribed to us. We can adapt it and say, okay, this ritual has a lot of patriarchal kind of history connected to it. I'm actually going to create a ritual ahead of time that acknowledges some of that. And then I'm going to adapt it and I'm going to weave it into my own being, or I'm going to do something for myself before I even get to that ritual so that I'm letting go of that. Or afterward, I'm gonna go swim in the ocean and release some of that, the stickiness of what I just felt part of. So
Right, right.
yeah, I don't know. I think that's where we get to be really creative and see this as a practice, but something that's evolving, right? And That's my
Right.
hope with the book, is to really just give people permission to find their own way in.
Beautiful. So everyone get the book. Nice message. And
Yeah.
and I am grateful for you, Megan. And I'm grateful for all of you reflecting on ritual today. Continue to stay in touch with Megan's work through Be Ceremonial, and continue to stay in touch with your own traditions and practices. And if my work at the Institute is helpful, stay in touch with me. I just want to be support for you and your journey. That's my hope. That's the goal of all of this, is to strengthen our human communities so that we have communities of less harm and more healing. That's the goal.
Beautiful. Well, I just think, somebody mentioned how it's needed now more than ever. And I just think all of us coming together, whether you're here live or watching the recording, we are now connected, this invisible thread, and we are going to take this into our neighborhoods, our friend groups, our families, and we might not take all of it, but we're going to take one little nugget, and what the ripple effects that will come from that, we don't yet know. But my hope is that as we face this future, that for a lot of us feels quite unknown and scary and heavy, and there's so much happening in the world right now that we're not quite sure what to do with. It all comes back to connecting in community. I believe that more than ever, the power of that happens when we gather virtually, when we gather in person. I think, Amy, I'm just so grateful that you are bringing people together in so many different ways as well. And I think between all of us, there's going to be so many ripple effects that we have yet to see and know, but it gives me a lot of hope. And so I'm going to hold on to that for the rest of my week. So thank you for having me and for everyone for joining. And please reach out, connect. For now, we'll say goodbye, and I'm sure we'll be in touch at some point in the future.
Awesome. Can we do a breath together to close it?
Oh, beautiful.
A little
Yes.
ritual ending. If it's comfortable for you, you can have a hand to your heart or your belly. Um, and if you want to close your eyes, of course, feel free, or simply gaze at something in your view that brings a sense of steadiness, and taking a deep breath in. When you feel ready, releasing. And perhaps one more time, noticing that flow. And thank you all so much for the gift of our time together. Well, this is recorded, and those watching via recording, thank you too for joining. Lots of love to all of you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.